All right, everyone. So yeah, Sean asked us if we would talk about the different deed and escrow programs that we have. I know Stephanie's in Lucas County is a little bit different than ours in Trumbull County. I'm sure if you are working at a land bank that you've heard of the deed and escrow program. So we're just going to kind of go over some of the differences between the two programs. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the types of deed and escrow programs that we have. Let's see. All right, can we flip to the next slide? One more. So the first thing I'll talk about is obviously we have the program for owner occupants, which is the #1 program that we like. Just because obviously we want to see owner occupants in housing. So we work with them pretty loosely. We try to set them up for success, but we also give them extra time when needed and extra support. We do have a 3-year owner occupancy restriction for any of our deed and escrow properties going to owner occupants, and that starts after the renovation is complete. So as stated, we hold the deed until the renovation is complete. And then once everything's done and we do our final inspection, we can get that transferred over to them. And that's when the 3-year occupancy restriction starts. That goes into their deed and just falls off after the 3 years. So we don't need to do anything at the end of that. The second type that we do is a developer agreement. So this is nice because the way that that program is structured is that a developer can come in, they still have the same requirements as an owner occupant would when they're renovating the house. But the difference between their agreement is that they agree to sell to an owner occupant at the end with that same 3-year owner occupancy restriction. So kind of a win-win-win. The land bank gets a house, the house is renovated, and then the developer obviously makes some money on that after they sell it. And we're still seeing an owner occupant in the home, and it's a little bit easier for them to get the financing for that move-in ready house. And then finally, we have the investor agreement, which is pretty open-ended. So that still goes through the same program. We still have them follow the assessment that we have set up on our website, and then they're able to purchase that and they can either resell it or they can use it as a rental. Typically on those, we don't have a lot of them. I would say usually it's only about 10% of the properties are available to investors. We usually have everything open to the developer agreements and to the owner occupants. So that kind of keeps the nicer properties, I guess, like for the owner occupants that don't have that much work. So we're going to go to the next slide. So this is what our intake assessment looks like. Usually we have a staff member go out and do a visual assessment, and we make sure that we're very clear that this is not a home inspection. So we do a visual assessment, meaning that anything we can see, we'll, take note of, and we will have that as like the minimum requirement for when the buyer is putting together their work plan. So they might, go above and beyond. We might have on there to patch a hole in the roof, and they might just decide to do the whole roof, which obviously is great. We encourage that. But at a minimum, the things that we have listed are the requirements to purchase that property. We also do put a really rough estimate. So it's kind of between what it would take for a contractor to do that work and what it would take for the purchaser to do that work themselves with their material costs. But at the end of the day, we do make them put together their own work plan with their estimates to do that work. So next slide. So this just talks about how we have them show proof of funding, because we do require that all purchasers show proof of funding before as they're turning in their application, we do allow for them to show credit card balances, or, bank statements would be the best way to show it. We can also accept like a family loan, and ultimately that can just be a letter from the family member stating that they're going to be the fiscal sponsor. And then they would need to show their proof of funding through, again, a bank balance or a credit card balance, or however they're showing that. We also require them to get contractor estimates for any of the mechanicals. So this can be a little bit tricky just because we don't have any of the utilities on when we do the intake assessment. So really we can only base it off of what we can see. So if we can see that, obviously like the water heater or the furnace is missing, then we do have them get the estimates for that. Just to make sure, for some of those bigger ticket items that they're accounting for the actual cost, because we do require that they use licensed contractors for that work, because we're holding the deed, and our building department will not issue a permit to just a private resident. They do have to have their license because it's not their home yet. I know sometimes if it's, homeowner doing the work, they'll allow it, but since we hold the deed, they won't. So we do require them to get those estimates. And then when we do end up going under contract, we just require that they pay half of the purchase price down and the other half is due at the end. And although they have to show that they have the proof of funding to do their whole renovation, that money just stays with them. We just have to see that they have it. But they're responsible for doing that. So next slide. All right. So as far as pricing and the sales restrictions, there's no real formula, I guess, as far as, what we decide the price to be. There are a couple determining factors that we look at. We look at the auditor's market value, which is really rough in Trumbull County, but we just kind of use it as a baseline. And then we look at how much renovation is going to need to be done to that house. A lot of times, because Trumbull County is on the smaller side, we do have a pretty good idea of what houses will go for fully renovated in those neighborhoods. So between those 3 or 4 things, we're able to put together a pretty good price for somebody to get that property, but also still have the money to put into it and still, have some equity in that house when they're done with the renovation. When we're looking at the restriction types, again, we look at the condition of the property. If a property needs just a ton of work and it doesn't really seem realistic for a homeowner, like a first-time homeowner or somebody going through that program to purchase it, those are the ones that will sometimes open up to investors. We also look at the neighborhood. If it, is a pretty stable neighborhood, or even the tipping point neighborhood, will usually leave those restrictions for the owner occupancy on there. Even, we've had them on some of the properties for years because we're just not willing to open those up to investors in certain neighborhoods. So next slide. All right. So as far as our contracts go, usually we give 4 to 6 months, and we do that expecting and hoping for them to get done in 9 to 12 months. We used to give them about a year to finish them, but we would see that it would usually take them at least a year, and usually it would go on to 2, just because they had the time, and it didn't seem to be like a priority if they had that extended period of time. So we kind of moved it back a little bit to that 4 to 6 months to kind of help, push them to get done a little bit faster. We do require that they have a general liability insurance, and they have to have the land bank listed as secondary insured. So that part of it, they have to give to us before any renovation work starts at all. And then when we go under contract with them, we've also put together a buyer packet, which has some good information and resources for them, because a lot of times the people have not done a renovation on a home before. So having all that information in one place is really helpful. I'll talk about the buyer packet a little bit more in a couple slides, just because I do think it's really good for the buyers to get. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so when we do our inspections, there's a couple different phases. So the first is just a phone call, and at about the 45-day mark, if we haven't received anything as far as proof that the utilities are on, we'll give them a call and just make sure that everything is on and going well. I know that around here, and I'm sure it's like this throughout the state, sometimes with land bank houses, the gas lines have been cut. And if that is the case, it can take anywhere from 30 to 60 days to have them come out and flag it and then redig it and all that. So when we go under contract, the first thing I do is tell them, get insurance and call the gas company, because in our contract, we do have for them to get the utilities on within that first 45 days. Knowing that, it might take a little bit longer because of that gas, the gas getting on, but at that 45-day mark, we just really want to make sure that if they're having any issues, that we can help them work through that. The next inspection that we do is the midway inspection, and that's just to help, to help us and them to just make sure that they're roughly 40 to 50% complete. And that way, if they're having issues with contractors or they're just really behind, we can kind of step in and give them a little bit more guidance. And then at that inspection, I'll usually walk them through what it takes for them to get their occupancy permit, which is another requirement that we have for the end of their renovation. So before we'll come out for our final inspection, we require that they have that occupancy permit in hand. So that way we're not going out, having the, occupancy inspection done, having something flagged, going back out. It just makes it easier for them and for us to know that that inspection has already been passed through the city or the county. So then the next inspection that we do, hopefully, is the final inspection. But if they're not done, we will go out and do an extension inspection. So at that point, we make sure that they're about 80% done. And we'll usually give them about 45 to 60 days, depending on how much work is still left. I should say also from the very beginning, if it's a larger project, and we know that it's not going to get done within that 4 to 6 months, we sometimes will go a little bit longer. But, we have a pretty good idea of how long it should take for a renovation. But if they're not done and they are nowhere near that 80%, if it's an owner occupant, we'll really sit down with them and come up with a new work plan. So usually I'll sit down and try to work with them to do a week by week work plan. And these are usually for first time home buyers. A lot of times they're younger, a younger couple or whatnot that are trying to do a lot of the work themselves and have gotten in a little bit over their head. So we do try to, help them plan that out a little bit more, because, we do not want the house back and we want them to succeed. So we, try to do everything that we can to get that to happen. Next slide. All right, so the last two inspections, as I mentioned, we have the occupancy inspection through the city or the county. And they just make sure that everything's up to code, that all the permits have been pulled, and that any inspections for like the plumbing, electric, and heating and cooling have been done. I know when I go out to do the final inspection, I am not an inspector. So I really lean on the city or the county to be able to ensure that, when they're moving into that house and they're, getting their final inspection and that occupancy permit, that, they're moving into a safe house. So that, is one way that we're able to utilize that. And there's a really little fee for it. And I believe I think the fee is even included in the general building permit that they have to pull in the beginning. So that's something that really helps us out. And then the last thing that we do is our final inspection. And that's where, myself or someone else will go out to the property and just go through their contract and through everything that they've agreed to do from the assessment. And we just make sure that it's done. I have on here a little note that we are a little bit more strict with investors just because, we are that last thing between that landlord and their tenant. So we want to make sure that when that property leaves our hands, we know that that's going to be a good living situation for the tenant that comes, because as I'm sure everybody knows, investors aren't always the best at keeping, their properties up. So, we just want to make sure that, as much as we can possibly do to make sure that, that tenant is going to move into a good situation. All right, next slide. All right, so some of the key lessons that we've learned over the years is that, again, I mentioned it, but we give less time on the front end, and then, we really try to work with them to make sure that their renovation moves along. And then the other thing that we've noticed is if you start giving more and more time, that's usually when we start to see that their funding runs out. So sometimes, when we were giving a year or even longer, they would get to that point and that initial proof of funding was really not relevant anymore because they had already exhausted those funds. So trying to keep them on track in the beginning while they have that funding available seems like it's helped over the years. And then another really important thing that I'll mention, I don't know if other counties are doing this, but we require that they show a 20% contingency for their available funding in the beginning. So that way, when unexpected things happen, not if, but when they happen, that they have, that little bit of cushion to be able to do those repairs. Next slide. So here are some of the resources that we have. This is just the first page of our the rehab packet that we have, and this just has a lot of those first things that you need to know. For us, it has the contacts for the city and the county departments. It has a whole list of through our county, they have a whole list of registered contractors. So I believe it has their name and phone number on that full list, and we just include that in the packet and let them know that those are not people that we're referring them to, but it's just a comprehensive list of everybody that is licensed in the county. So that's been really helpful. It also kind of gives a checklist of, what steps to take first, when to expect the inspections to happen, and it's just an overall nice resource to be able to hand the buyer when they sign the contract. So they have like a little cheat sheet of sorts to be able to get started. Next slide. So with this, we have this on our website. So I'm sure anybody that answers phone calls for land banks knows that one of the first questions is, how does this program work? And we have a step-by-step guide on our website that walks them through everything. Stephanie, if you can click on that a little bit, you can kind of just click through the first like 2 or 3 just to kind of see what that looks like. But we go through, how properties are acquired and then exactly what they'll need to do with links to our website and things. So it just is, a nice way for them to be able to have that. I know that usually when I'm explaining on the phone, it usually takes me about 1.5 minutes to go through the whole program and how everything works. And I'm sure that they do not remember more than 10 seconds of that conversation. So this is an easy way for them to be able to go back to the website and kind of go through that a little bit more. All right, and we can go to the next slide. We don't need to play this, but what it is it's just a YouTube video that we attach to every Facebook post that we do. So it's just a 1:44 run through of exactly how the program runs. So that way, when we do make a Facebook post and people, might not be that familiar with the program, they can watch that pretty quickly and, have a little bit more information before they reach out. And the next slide. I think with the key impacts, I think a lot of us kind of know this information, but the things that I've noticed, anytime that, people are doing a renovation, whether it's actually ones that we're doing through the land bank or properties that are going through the Deed-in-Escrow program, usually, we'll start to see renovation work starting on other houses in those neighborhoods. And that could be, things as little as people building a porch or, painting or installing landscape. It just kind of seems like it gives them a little bit of a push to, bring their property up a little bit more. And then, stabilizing neighborhoods and increasing the chance for other homes to be purchased. That's a big one. Nobody wants to, live next to our typical land bank houses. So, that's a big deterrent for other properties that might be for sale on that street. So when we can take care of one of those, and especially if it's a really good renovation, it really helps stabilize the neighborhoods. And then the biggest one that I see is, giving people the opportunity to be homeowners. And usually if they're doing a lot of the work themselves, they can do that without having a mortgage. So, they might put some money on their, especially if they're using, some of their credit cards with like the high interest rates. A lot of times they're able to open a home equity loan against the house once it transfers over, and to be able to pay off some of that and have a much lower, payment than if they were going to, pay on their credit card, obviously. But most of the time, people tell me that, it's definitely a journey to get to the end of it. But I don't know that I've heard from anybody that they would not do it again. So I don't know. It definitely is a good opportunity. And the next slide.
I think it might be the end, Mikenna, is it?
Probably. I just,
Okay.
but yeah, just to kind of wrap it up, that's, the way that this program works. It's not the end all be all of all programs, but I've been with the land bank for 9 years, and it's always worked really well. I think in the 9 years that I've worked with the land bank, I think we've only had 5 or 6 people that have not been successful going through the program. And I think 2 or 3 of those were basically non-starters. Like we checked in at the 45-day mark and they didn't answer our phone call. But thank you. That's all I have. So I can turn it over to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thanks, Mikenna. I'm gonna pull up my screen now with my presentation. Okay. So like McKenna said, our programs are similar in certain ways, but you'll notice as we go through, there's definitely some differences to it also. So I'm just gonna dive right into it. Just for some context, I'm from the Lucas County Land Bank. Our primary city that we operated in is Toledo, so right by Lake Erie in Michigan. Toledo is the largest city in Lucas County. We've seen, like a lot of cities in Ohio, quite a population decline over the last few decades, which has resulted in a lot of abandoned homes, which is why we were created. We've been a land bank since 2010, and I've been here for 7 years, always working on the renovation enforcement program since I've started. Like I'm sure a lot of you on this call, our mission is to strengthen neighborhoods through raising property values by acquiring vacant, abandoned, and tax delinquent properties. And one of the ways we repurpose those is to do our renovation enforcement program, is what we call it. So what we do is, for every property that goes through a tax foreclosure in Lucas County and doesn't sell at a sheriff's sale, they forfeit to the state of Ohio. And then we go through each one of those properties to determine if it's something that can be renovated and salvaged and is a good candidate for our renovation program. So very similar to the checklist that McKenna showed us for Trumbull, we have a couple field staff on our land bank staff here that goes out and evaluates each property, goes through very similar items like Trumbull does, and tries to put a best cost estimate on those items as well. So we have a good idea of what it would cost to renovate that property. And then we do some research here in the office on the market comps and the auditor's value and things like that as well, to determine if it seems like it would be a good fit for the program. If it is, we decide to put it through the program. We clean out the property first using local contractors. And then a big difference, I think, that we do, and I don't know how common this is throughout the state, but we list all of our properties with local real estate agents. So we have two brokerages that we work with that went through a bidding process a couple of years ago, are the ones we're working with now, that they have dedicated agents who work through land bank properties. So all of our properties get assigned to an agent who helps us decide on the list price and facilitates showings, and they answer a lot of questions about our program and things like that for us. So we do trainings with them throughout the year just to make sure we're staying up to date on the correct information to give our potential buyers. When we are accepting or reviewing offers, I should say, from buyers, we have three main things that we expect from the buyers. The first is that they're going to give us an honest reason for their end use of the property. We accept offers for direct owner occupancy, for resale to owner occupancy, for family use, and for rentals. So we do have properties that we exclusively are looking for owner occupant or resale to an owner occupant, and we advertise them that way. And those are not open to rental investors, but unless it's classified that way, we would consider end uses from all of those four options. But we always do prioritize owner occupancy. So in addition to their end use, they have to give us a plan to renovate the property. And then they have to show us that they have the money to purchase the property and the money to fund their renovation plan up front. The funding sources that we accept are really similar to Trumbull also, so I won't go into that at length, but it's generally a bank account or a savings account, retirement, credit cards, things like that. Once we've accepted an offer, we close on the property using some local title agencies. We have, I think, 4 right now that we work with that understand the land bank transactions and give us a little bit of a deal on the fee structure for the closing. And so the buyer becomes the owner the day that we close on the property. So we're signing a deed that day. But a big portion of a difference here between us and Trumbull is that rather than doing the deed in escrow, we do what's called a renovation enforcement note and mortgage. So what that is a document. The note is just like a promissory note where they are we're selling them the property in exchange for them renovating it. And that's the note is their promise. And then the mortgage is the way that we secure that promise to the property as a lien on title during the renovation period. So we try to let people know that, explain it the same way that most people know what a mortgage is. So explaining it that way to people is easy to understand. We just clarify this is not a loan for you to be renovating this property. It's just the way that we secure the interest to the property. When I first started here, we did a reverse deed in escrow instead of the note and mortgage, where essentially we did sell it to them at the very beginning of the project, but we had them sign a deed that would that we could record if we needed the property back because they were failing to meet their end of the bargain. But we started getting a little bit of pushback from the title companies who were holding those deeds in escrow to that they weren't necessarily comfortable with it and they weren't really sure that they could enforce them. So after doing a little bit of research, we looked at Syracuse in New York, and they were doing the note and mortgage program. And so I think we switched to that in like late 2016. And we've had a lot of success with that, explaining that and using that mechanism so far. So the default renovation period that we give is 6 months for the residential properties that we sell. A lot of times, if it's a property that's a much larger home in one of our historic districts, we will start out at a 9-month period instead of 6, just with the understanding that those projects are much more complicated than just like a regular residential home might be. We let people know they can't be occupying the property during the renovation period. That would be a breach of our contract. Similar to how Mikenna explained, we touch base with all of our buyers at about the halfway point. So generally that's the 3-month point for most buyers that start out with that 6-month period, where we're just giving them a friendly reminder of, you're about halfway through your project. If you're having any problems, let us know. I would say, echo what Mikenna said. We certainly do not see people generally finish in that 6-month period. I would say just anecdotally, I would think that it's about a year really that people take. So we're very flexible with extensions. We don't want these properties back, like Mikenna said. So as long as meaningful progress is ongoing on the property, we're pretty flexible about allowing those extensions to happen. What we mean by meaningful progress is, if we set up a touch base inspection that we are seeing that same kind of things Trumbull's looking for, that they've had progress getting their utilities hooked up and, they've got exterior stuff buttoned up, things like that. If we're seeing that there is a real problem where there's really been no work done or less work than we would anticipate, we do more hand holding where we would do like an official extension addendum that acts as an addendum to our purchase agreement, where we make them give us a new renovation time period and show us proof of funding again and things like that. And I generally find that doing that helps them become a bit more serious. And then we sometimes we're going to start inspecting this property every month until you get it done and things like that. And I think having that extra layer of communication for those properties that are struggling to get finished has really helped make them a little bit more serious about the project. When someone thinks they're done with a property that they're renovating, we actually hire a third-party company to complete the renovation inspection, because the city of Toledo, where most of our houses are sold, does not do a certificate of occupancy for anything less than 4 units. So for just like the single family or duplex, they don't do that. I mean, we still require that they're pulling permits and getting those finalized and things like that, but the city is not going to come out and inspect for us to sign off on any of these. So the land bank at our cost hires a third-party inspection company who will come out and use this inspection report that is there as an example. They're pretty thorough. Again, to stress, it's not like the kind of inspection you would get if you're buying a property and your bank wants you to get an inspection or something like that, but it is pretty thorough. And what results from this is the inspector gives us a write-up with photos that we then share directly with the buyer to let them know of anything that was found to be non-compliant. And we give them additional time if needed to fix those. And then generally just a final inspection would be completed by one of our staff members here who would go out with that list from the inspector, and that's what they'd be looking at. And then once they have passed this inspection is when the land bank would file that's called a satisfaction of mortgage. And that is what tells, everyone on record on that title that our lien is gone and they satisfied the requirements we had for them. So the only caveat on that is if someone had chose to do the property as a resale to owner occupancy, we continue to hold our mortgage on the property while they are marketing it. And once they have an accepted offer from a buyer that's an owner occupant, they have to share that purchase agreement with us, and they have to tell the title company to contact me when they are ready to ask for that release, because the mortgage comes up on title. So the title company usually reaches out to me directly, letting me know they need that release of lien. And as long as they've done everything we've asked for, we go ahead and satisfy that. So just a little bit extra there if you're doing it for resale. I would say, like I said, I've worked here for 7 years now, and the renovation program has been part of our process, or part of our land bank since the very beginning, since 2010. So we've went through some iterations and obviously learned over the years things that work and things that don't work. But I would feel like the thing I would stress is the importance of being very critical during that offer review process, where we're reviewing offers that come in from interested buyers. We ask a lot of questions on the front end. We're not necessarily looking for them to match like a magic dollar figure of estimate for us, but they need to be making sure they're hitting the marks of all of the major things that need done to the property, like a new furnace or new roof, major systems works, things like that. But then if they say that, but they don't give us a realistic price for that, we definitely keep that dialogue open, ask for quotes, things like that. But the more that intensity that we put into that offer review process, it seems the more successful the project goes overall. And so I would definitely stress the importance of really diving into the buyer at the very beginning to make sure the rest of the process is going to be smooth. Just like Mikenna said, definitely expect to have extensions to your projects, because we generally like to say it will be done in 6 months. But again, I think most people are requiring about a year, especially since the pandemic. The availability of contractors in our area and supply shortages and things like that has really made those extensions necessary. But with that in mind, keeping regular contact and doing touch base inspections, especially for projects that are moving a little slower, that has definitely helped as well to make sure they know that we're still monitoring the project. I think that we have found that having real estate agents list the property is very helpful to us. We, our small operation here, and it does cost extra money to, pay them a commission at the sale. But the amount of work that I think they take out of our office as far as answering questions for us, doing the showings, helping us understand the markets and things like that, I think that they've been pretty invaluable, just getting our properties out there and the MLS and things like that. So if you're able to do something like that, I would definitely recommend it. Something we've started in the last few years at least is we've started making our own strategic investments to some of the properties before we list them. So that might mean, the roof needed replaced years ago and it's certainly not getting better. So we'll replace a roof before we put it on the market. Little things like that maybe would tip the scales from this house is not going to be attractive enough to sell to now it's made the project a little bit easier. So people are willing to take a chance on it. The other thing I would say is, there are situations where we've had to take properties back. That also is something that you might expect to have to do, especially if you've been running the program for as long as we have. But it still is really just, I would say, maybe a dozen properties over the years that we've taken back, and they've all been mutual decisions. They've been in situations where folks got into the project, realized there was some kind of major damage that none of us could have foreseen. They started pulling up floorboards and realized there's a lot of termite damage or something like that. So we've decided to take the properties back to, solve the problem instead of just sticking it on the person who had not foreseen that. Some people do just get in over their heads, and, if you pressure them about it a little bit and make them be honest, they'll admit that. And generally what we've realized is if we can, give them a little bit of money back from their purchase price or something like that, but relieve them of the project that isn't going anywhere. They have been, willing to work with us on that, and we'll take those properties back. Some of them we have marketed again and found new buyers who completed the project, and those are the ideal situation, but others have just turned into demolition because of major items we weren't aware of. This is just some pretty photos to put in there, so you're not looking at words the whole time, but this is a property that went through this program in the south part of Toledo in our old South End. So this was a really great couple we worked with. The land bank actually did make some substantial investment in this one prior to selling it to Miss Annetta here, and then she and her husband completed the project. So that was a successful one, one of, over 800 that we have had completed to date. So our program impact, like I said, we've had a little over 800 properties that we've sold in the last decade. That includes all of our residential properties we've sold for commercial use, and lots that we've sold for new construction. We are actively tracking about 100 renovation projects at any given time that are ongoing, that I'm usually the only person in the office who's having like the constant contact with these people. So it is a big undertaking, and it takes, a lot of my time, obviously, as a staff member. But over those years, we have been able to leverage millions of dollars of private individuals making those investments. And we certainly, as a land bank, would not have been able to reach that volume. Just trying to do it ourselves with our in-house renovations. So, it's resulted in hundreds of properties being saved from abandonment and increasing the value and comps and equity and safety for all of the houses that are around it. And that's really what, is important to us, is trying to make the blocks better for those neighbors that live there and are invested there. So that is it for my presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen, Sean, if you want to jump back in.
Yes, thank you, Mikenna and Stephanie. That was a great presentation. Now we can open it up. Everyone is able to unmute themselves now. So if you have any questions for the two of them, feel free to ask. All right. So I guess I have a question. Have you guys had any pushback from your local government or buyers about the process of like a deed and escrow buyer renovated program, Mikenna, to like the land bank holding the deed, or Stephanie like having a lien on their property when they might think they have bought it outright?
I think Mikenna needs unmuted, Sean.
You should be able to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted now.
Oh, did I mess that up?
Yeah, maybe that's why nobody had any questions. Really. So we definitely get pushback when we tell people that we're going to hold the deed until the end of their renovation, especially when they're first time, callers and they don't know much about the land bank. They have expressed opinions that, why am I going to put this money into it if I'm not going to have the deed? And I think that, once we kind of explain the program and we explain that it is a purchase agreement, so it's a contract, and we're not, just telling them to go out and start, the renovation without anything, they're usually pretty understanding. And the people that aren't, we just tell them that the program might not be a good fit. Sometimes we'll refer them to like sheriff sales or whatnot, if that's something that, is really worrying them. But for the most part, I think a lot of, this is going to sound weird, but we have a lot of like support from people that have gone through the program. So a lot of times they can even look up like our reviews on like our Facebook page and whatnot. And usually anybody that's gone through the program will step in and, defend us and say that they've gone through the program and it's legitimate and solid. So yeah,
I would say it's been helpful to have that mortgage, because that is easier to explain, because we can tell them like, you are becoming the owner the day that you sign for it with us. And I think, like I said, most people kind of understand the concept of a lien on property. So I don't think we've gotten much pushback on the instrument that we use. I would say the most pushback we've gotten, and maybe Mikenna would agree, is like people have pushback on acting like we're a little too strict on what we expect to see from a renovation plan. But obviously, like I said in the presentation, I think being strict about that is what makes the project successful. Like, we don't want to set people up for failure by selling them something that they didn't have an adequate, idea of how to fix it or where to go from there. So I think being honest and saying sometimes our program's not for everyone, like that's an okay thing to say, because it's true. It's a unique thing to buy a fixer upper, and like none of our properties are in great condition, and they seem to all require like all of the systems and the roof and things like that. So again, we don't want to set people up for failure. So
Awesome. Thank you. And I apologize, everyone. Now you can, in fact, unmute yourself and ask any questions you may have. I see Caravanzat. What is the best piece of advice for a land bank that is looking to start using this process?
I think deciding what enforcement mechanism you're going to use, whether that be like the deed or the reverse deed in escrow, like we talked about, or I kind of briefly mentioned, or the mortgage, and then talking to a land bank who has that model would be helpful. I think also we're really good about sharing our resources in the Ohio Land Bank Association world. So, don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. Like, it sounds like Mikenna and I both have inspection sheets we'd be willing to share, and contracts that we'd be willing to share. And, I have like a really standard template of how I review offers and things like that. So any of that I would be happy to share with people who are trying to launch a program.
Yeah, I'm also, I mean, if anybody wants to talk more in depth about, the beginning phases of it or anything like that, I'm definitely open to having a conversation. But I would say probably to start small. I would probably start, with just listing a couple houses and see how it goes and ease into it. And as you feel more comfortable, list a couple more.
And to follow up on that, we also, through the Ohio Land Bank Association, we do have a bunch of the templates that land banks have allowed us to share with the members. So in addition to Stephanie and Mikenna, if anyone is interested in getting any of these documents or kind of some templates to use, you can definitely reach out to me as well. And
I would also just, sorry, Sean, I would also just plug that if anyone's going to the upcoming conference in Dayton next month, that myself and our land bank attorney here, and then another land bank member from Hamilton County, we're doing a renovation deed and escrow type presentation there as well. That's also going to have a bigger segment about like the legal mechanisms that we use as kind of deed and escrow, reverse deed and escrow, and mortgage and note. And I think you can get CLE credit for that too, but that might be a good place to start too, is if you're going to be in Dayton, maybe try to come to that presentation, because like I said, I'll be there, but so will a couple other people who can talk maybe a bit more about those instruments and stuff that we use.
I do hope everyone plans on attending the Ohio Land Bank Conference, April 26th through the 28th. You can find it at ohiolandbanks.org. What happens when it goes bad? If the buyer doesn't finish with the project, but are not looking to get out of it by selling it back?
I think that that's where our staff attorney comes in pretty handy, explaining that we have the legal authority to take that property back through a mortgage foreclosure. Again, that's kind of easier to explain to people, because I think most people understand what a foreclosure is also. So I will say we're lucky enough to have never gotten to the point where we've had to actually foreclose on a mortgage in the renovation enforcement program, because we've worked through those. I wouldn't call them threats, but that we would have to take you to court for this. This is why this isn't working out. And not saying that people are receptive the first 1 or 2 or 3 times you tell them that, but staying pretty vigilant and explaining to them that this is how this isn't going to work back, maybe we'll give you some cash for keys kind of thing has been successful, giving them like a nominal amount back. But we haven't actually had to foreclose yet on it. So I guess we've either had agreeable people or our lawyer using his lawyer voice has worked. I'm not sure, but.
I mean, I would say, very similar to that. Like, we haven't had a lot that have, that we've had to take back. I think there was only one where we had a little bit of resistance. And I mean, I think we even had worked with her for like 7 or 8 months to try to come up with the funding to finish the renovation. And I think that, after we kind of walked through that for that period of time, she just, knew that I think she needed like $20,000 to complete the project, and she did not have any of it. And I think that after that time period of her trying to find it, I think that, she was pretty open to, also giving it back and understanding that she couldn't finish. And the same thing, like, we gave her some of that money back. I know we had her show some of the like her receipts and things like that. And I think we gave her like a percentage back on that. So, I mean, that's, one incentive. And a lot of times if people are at that point where we are talking about taking the property back, they also are pretty aware that they probably can't finish either. But we luckily haven't had that many that we've had to do. But usually we will use that deposit. Like, we haven't put half of it down in the beginning, and we'll usually give them like a percentage of that back to kind of help ease the pain of losing it. But
Yeah.
Right. Next question, Emmy Favich. Are either of your land banks utilizing BOR for acquisition or just forfeitures to state of Ohio?
We used to use BOR pretty heavily, but because of the recent changes in legislation, or I should say really judicial rulings that have come out about acquiring things through BOR before them being exposed to the sheriff's sale, if the taxes due are less than the auditor's assessed value, we have really switched to just getting them from forfeitures, unless it falls into that category. If there's a house that the back taxes are more than the value of the property, it can still come to us directly through BOR, but that's just not the case in most situations for us. Most houses owe less taxes than they do have value, so they have to be exposed to a sheriff's sale and then forfeit before the land bank can take them, is what we've been operating under.
same. Yeah, I mean, exactly the same. Like, we'll sometimes get properties in through donation. And that's usually just through private donations of people that either, a family member has died and they're out of state, or if there's code violations through the city, sometimes they'll tell them, if a property is condemned or on the board order demolition list, our health department will give them our information and give them that option to donate the property to the land bank, or, obviously they can fix those code violations. So we do get some through that. We've also used NCST has properties that come in for us to view. So we've gotten a couple through that program, but the majority come in after they go through sheriff's sale.
Yeah, same.
All right. Is there any other questions for Mikenna or Stephanie? All right. With that, we'll close this up. Again, I'll send the presentation out to everyone so that you have it for reference.